When it comes to the head, a lot of the head is based on the skull. No matter who you draw, their skull shape defines how their face would end up looking. You don't have to draw a face by drawing a skull first, but knowing what parts of the skull actually show through the forms of the face is important to have in your toolbox when you're drawing faces. So the first part that most people can see right through the skull, or most people can see when they're drawing a face, is the frontal bone. So if you touch any of these areas, you're basically just touching your bone, and the skin at that area is super thin. So the frontal bone is pretty straightforward. It's your forehead area, and there's some bends and like forms within that, but just having the frontal bone be flat works perfectly fine when you're drawing the human face. When we add muscle, it adds a little bit more depth for when to make sure that when you're drawing like different emotions, that muscle affects the way the skin goes up and down on the head itself. So the first one is the frontal bone. It's pretty straightforward, and then it's the temporal bone on these sides right here. So this part of the skull actually shows a little bit on your face because your head is not just a flat rectangle. A part of it kind of pops out like this if you look at it from the front. So that little side of your head is still showing when you look at someone from the front. The next bone is the zygomatic arch. This is basically your cheekbones, and if you have sharper cheekbones, this is like the skin here is basically wrapping like this. It's really tight skin. Sometimes you might be chubbier. Even if you're chubbier, you'll still have this cheekbone area. You could even touch it on your face, and like whatever weight your face will go, you'll have a little bit of the cheekbone protruding. It's usually this corner that kind of pops out of your makes the shape of your head. So if I was to draw a face like that, you could see that pop right there when you're drawing the head. After the zygomatic arch or the cheekbone, it's the nose basically. So you have this part of your nose, which is not the front part that everyone defines when they talk about a nose, but it's the bridge of your nose is all bone, and you could feel it as soon as you touch it. And depending on the nose, it could always be different. Like for example, mine looks like this. The bridge of my nose feels like this. So that's how the bone here looks on my skull if I were to try to draw my skull from just touching my own face and getting pimples. So the next part is the molar cheekbone, or I kind of just call it the bottom eye socket, but this area is also a part of the cheekbone. So it's a part of this zygomatic arch, but it's basically the bottom part that of your skull that holds your eyes, right? So if you look at someone in the eyes, you could see that ridge right under their eyelid, and that's what this is. So it's super prominent in drawing heads, and it's a bone that actually shows when you look at someone in the face. And then the next and last one is actually the jawbone. That is also has a very thin layer of skin showing the angle of the jaw. It's all based on that, and it can be hidden if you gain a little weight. That's why people have double chins and things like that. But overall, the jawbone is another part of your face that the skull kind of shows itself through. For the side of the head here, the front bone, we can see the bend of your skull, usually at this point, but it's always different for every person. And the nasal bone, we could see it more pop out like here, and you can see that shape that it makes with the inside. So out here is where your nose would be, like a little bit of a bulbous part. Maybe it just tips up. The shape is always different depending on the person, but you'll have this hard part of the skull of the nasal bone when you're looking at it from the side. The zygomatic arch, when you're drawing it from the side, it looks more like a shadow, but it's there, and you could tell what this area of the person's face is just from that zygomatic arch's shadow. And then we have our jaw, just like at the front. And I want to add another one, which is the mastoid process. It's just the area under the ear where your skull kind of ends. It's a really hard area that you can feel. It's not seen a lot, but it is good to know that there's this hard area there when you draw the side of the head or the back. So now I'm going to add the muscles to this head right now. When we start to add muscle, we start to fill out the head a lot more, and it gets closer to what the face, what a person looks like. And of course, even the muscles, depending on where they're more prominent and stuff, it'll make the face look a bit more different. But in general, these muscles are basically what move the important parts of the body of your face, and it also and it also fills out areas where of the skull that are more like, you know, hollow. So the first part I want to talk about, of course, again, is the forehead area. So at first we had this frontal bone area, which is just basically your full forehead, this shape that you would have in the skull. But then what you get are what are called the frontalis, which is these two shapes that come out in your head. So these help to build up your eyebrows, like move your eyebrows around and move your forehead. So that's why when you see someone who might be burrowing their brow and stuff, you always see a lot of wrinkling in the center, because the muscles kind of bend over and you could see that like there's a little gap between these two muscles that show where that show more bone in that area, right? So if you touch it, that's straight bone, and when you move the muscles, you kind of feel that like that furrow would go down and up like that. So that's one important part that the muscles and bone do when you're drawing a face. The next one is the temporal bone. This basically fills out the side of your head. It's this right here, temporal. And this one right here. And on top of that, we get our auricular muscle, or you could just say side of the head muscle, side. And if you can move your ears, that means you have strong version of that muscle. Some people can't move their ears, but that muscle basically fills out the shape of the head a bit more and protects the skull. So I want to quickly draw that with the skin wrapping around it. It would just basically go right above it. And then we got our ears that in this case I'm not really going to focus on, but you get your ears that they do their ear like things, like give you sounds. And then the next part of this head is the oculus oculi. I call it the eye muscle. So it's real. This really gives the shape of what your eyelids would look like. So I should draw an eye right here. And I add this right there. They really wrap around your eye in this kind of direction that flows like that really flows around your eye. And within here sits the eyeball, so you have these muscles that help to move your eyeball around, and it also protects your eyeball a little bit. So I'm going to just darken this eyebrow that I drew, kind of sketching it quickly. And then the next muscle I want to talk about, or not really a muscle, but more like fat that define your nose. So if I just quickly draw that, and you got your eyeball a little bit like the eye muscles kind of wrapping around. And of course it changes based on the person, but the shape and the general form it makes is always the same. And then the next one is your masseter, which is your jaw muscle. So that basically lets your jaw move around, so up and down. So when you stretch that muscle, you're basically moving your mouth down, your jaw down, hinging it, and when you pull it back, it holds it in place, and you're compressing that muscle a little bit. So this muscle allows you to talk a lot. So quickly draw that, and you still see a little bit of the bone. So if you see the side part, you can see that bottom part of the jaw is still not covered by the muscle itself, but the muscle is prominent, and it really does like help to move this jaw like a hinge. Then the next part is the mouth muscles. So this would be the top lip and the bottom lip. They both have a very similar shape that radiates from the center basically. I'm going to add that little dimple that people have. So it basically looks like this. And then the bottom, you have a little bit of bone in the middle bottom part that kind of just where the wraparound of the muscle stops. So it kind of just comes all the way to the top part of the skull. So I'm going to call that the mouth muscle. The scientific name is the orbicularis aries. So basically, if it's orbicular, it just means it circles around or orbits the specific part of the body. And then also where the jaw is, we have something called the triangularis. So that's the bottom muscle. This is what lets your lips let your bottom lip move a lot more than your top lip. So your top lip, you can move it a good amount, But the bottom lip, you can move it out and more and in, and like kind of stretch it out from the bottom too, like from the sides if you wanted to, without like using your hands, right? So that's the triangularis, or just bottom lip. I'm just using like the easier names that make sense to me for my head to understand what parts of the body it is, right? Like knowing these Latin scientific names is super useful, but for what I need to know to draw, I'm not going to memorize them or anything. And then we want to move down to the neck a little, so we get our sternomastoid, which basically connects from that ridge of the skull and goes all the way down to the collarbone, and it allows us to basically turn our head, look up, look down. It helps a lot with the movement of the head. That's why when you when someone turns, you can always see that, like, so if this is the neck and they're looking this way maybe, but their neck is like this, you can always see this shape right here, even though they're looking the other way. So it protrudes and bends, and that's a part of the movement of the head that you'll see while drawing someone, and you could add that little detail to indicate that the head's turning and that muscle is actually working. So the next one is the traps, which is what connects the neck to the torso and the scapula and everything. And the stronger a person is, the more prominent it becomes. It also helps with tilting your head on the pivot of the neck. But now if I were to just draw a head using this thing real quick, I'm just going to quickly shade it and add a lot of details on this front one. So that's basically how you draw a head, or like the important parts of the anatomy that you actually need when you draw a head. Of course, I'm basically drawing over everything, so you can't really see the detailed drawing, but I hope the information that I gave was useful enough for you to use or think about when you're drawing portraits or anything like that. Now for the side profile, we got our nose. I'm going to make the eye a lot more prominent. Give some eyelashes right there. We have a little bit of fat from that muscle, but it's going to be eyebrows right there. Boom, 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 boom. I feel like I drew the hair kind of bending down this way here. And then the lip that goes like this. I would say this should be shorter, and then we have that muscle there, so I'm going to add a little bit of this. I'm drawing the shadows from the cheekbone, so this person has that weird buccal fat removal, I guess. Neck. We have the trapezius kind of coming from the back of the skull, while the sternomastoid comes from that divot that comes at the end of the front end of the back of the skull, so right behind the ear. That's where the sternomastoid comes from. So I'm going to draw eyebrow. I'm going to add a little bit of thing there, depending on the hair. Maybe you have a little bit of thing. And the triangularis, I want to be a little bit more clear here. So this is basically how it looks. It kind of connects to the jaw really lightly, so you still have the bone at the bottom of the jaw, but it's like sticks to the jaw a little the jawbone, and kind of pulls the mouth towards the upper mouth bone area of your skull. And then this is the orbit, like the mouth orbit muscle. But that's basically all I have on drawing, on like what anatomy is important when you draw portraits and stuff like that. Subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and comment if you want me to draw or talk about a different topic. Thanks. Bye.